Here we are at the sixth of the 6 videos I'm providing to you on Excel, how to turn yourself into an Excel hero. And what we're looking at here right now is the final spreadsheet that came out of video 5. And you can recognize we have our conditional formatting built in, and we have some values in the Price Now column that's helping us check out the conditional formatting. At this point, what I'm going to do is to switch to a slightly more complex version of the spreadsheet to show you where analysis with this type of data might go. We could play with this one here to do a little bit of what if, but I'm afraid it wouldn't be very interesting. The intention here was we could change any one of the values of the stock of one of these companies. For example, Abbott Laboratories, we're indicating here, went from $48.69 up to $60, and we wanted to see the effect on the total market capitalization of these 30 large firms in Chicago and what this change would be from March the 5th. So if I made this $65 and I press the Enter key, watch up here for these total values at the top and this percentage change as I change this one number. It's a factor in how these other values are computed. And you see rapidly that all of the formulas have been recomputed, this value having changed because of my having changed it affected all of these others. I can rapidly go back and see what the value looked like before by doing this undo. $60 resulted in these totals, and redoing that change results in these. So that's interesting to a point, but how would somebody use this kind of a spreadsheet really? Let me show you an example of what someone might do in a more realistic way with this very same data. Here we see a spreadsheet that I've enhanced just a little bit, and you'll recognize that there are some additional columns on the left and the right. Let's suppose what we were really trying to do here was to get some sort of an idea of the economic climate at the present time and what effect it would have on various companies that we've classified in some way. Supposing we had classified each one of these companies based on the kind of business they are in, and we established these 4 codes. And it really doesn't matter what these codes might stand for. This is something that would have some sense to the analyst who had set this up. But we have 4 different codes here, and for each we can predict a different percentage of change based on something like a world crisis or some event or some seasonal change. We can, by some means, estimate this, and what we want to see is, based on our prediction of how things will change for companies of these different types, we'd like to see the effect on everybody's stock individually and on the total market capitalization. What these are percentages. Now you can see just by looking at this that the percentage change column is going to serve sort of a verification purpose for us. Here we have a company that we've classified with this code of F. The predicted change for code of F is minus 3.62%, and this is a confirmation that the calculation that we put into this column actually is correct. It's interesting, and it's also kind of nice when we have separate computations that can check one another. What is this minus 3.62 doing? Well, here's what it is. For this company classified in code F, I've changed this formula. In fact, I've inserted a formula here. This used to be a value I would plug in. Now it's being computed with this formula. Well, what does this formula stand for? Well, it begins with the market price on March the 5th, some baseline number. And look at, it's involving here cell K2. That's this cell right here, K column row 2. This is a percentage, but it's not expressed with a percent sign after it, meaning I've formatted this as a number on my own to be convenient for my entry purposes. I'm going to change these numbers as my predictions of economic effect change. So for minus 3.62%, what I really want to do with this formula is take the value of this stock 4552 on March the 5th and multiply it by that percentage. Now in order to do that, I have to put 1 in here, because if this were 0%, I'd need 100% of this value to equal this one. That's what the 1 stands for. The K2 is this percentage, but it's 100 times too large, because that really means 0.0362 times something. When I state it as a percentage, it's 100 times larger than it really is. So I need to multiply it by 100th in order to reduce it down and scale it properly. This sum, 1 plus 0.0362, if I multiply that times the original value, I'll get the price now. Since this is negative, it's going to be a decline. In the same way, here for code M companies, take a look at code M, the formula there, same formula. On the right side, 1 plus this value here in row 3, converted into a decimal number I can multiply. And you'll notice here, this percentage change is this percentage change here. It actually has been employed in this formula. In the same way, I can change this value here, and any code P companies, their formula for their new stock price includes that particular value. So these values each appear in multiple formulas. This is one way to code this, but it's not as flexible as if I actually installed some logic to have this code determine which percentage applied. But this is more typical of the way somebody might work out a spreadsheet. This is information telling me which one of these to use in the formula here. The point of this is I can change just these values right here in these cells, and I can affect an awful lot of values here. So let's see how that works. If I go here and I say, for code F, any company with code F, I'm going to say their stock will decline. Now my prediction is, based on economic conditions, it will decline 2.5%. Watch what happens to any of these companies that are coded with code F and on the total. You see a very significant change here. This 2.5% is now reflected any place where the company is coded with an F. And very rapidly, I can go through here and adjust whatever kind of studies I've done that indicate I think the overall effect on companies of this type is going to be this much, and I can rapidly make this prediction on their values. So let's take a few other examples. How about code R? Let's find this one. It's going from 76 to 79 based on this 4% increase. Let's find another R down here at the bottom. These last two, they're both rising 4.7%. So with those three in mind, let's change our prediction on this. Let's say that we think it's going to decline 1% now. And we can see here, this 76 went to 75, a 1% decline. This 84 went to 83, this 54 went to 53, also 1% declines. A spreadsheet that's made up like this can very rapidly get to this change value without having to make multiple entries which would be error prone. This is a significant advantage of this type of spreadsheet. And this is one of the reasons that people who do these kinds of analysis really flocked to these in the 1980s when this became available in the form of VisiCalc run on Apple computers. This was stupendous in terms of its ability to automate and speed up and make more reliable this kind of a process. Now, as long as we're looking at this, let me point out something else. You'll notice these funny little marks over here. In order to find out what they mean, you click in that cell and a little symbol like this kind of a warning sign comes up. And the message here, the formula in this cell differs from the formulas in this area of the spreadsheet. Yes, it's intended to. Excel is trying to be a little helpful here too. It's thinking that the formulas ought to follow a regular pattern of the row numbers changing. But if I click on the little arrow next to it, it tells me more about what the error seems to be. And it gives me the option of ignoring it if I want to. Inconsistent formula, there really is nothing inconsistent about it from our point of view, because here this company is of a different code, so yes, this formula will be different than the company that precedes it and the company that follows it. So I'm just going to click ignore the error, and then that funny little green mark goes away. And the same thing happens here. It's not really an inconsistent formula. So if I wanted to clean this up, I could do that. And you'll notice it hasn't happened in very many places because the logic in Excel to do this is kind of simple-minded. Tries to be helpful, but in this case, it may be confusing. Another thing I wanted to point out, let's take a look at this. What about these formulas? Why does this formula look a little bit different? What's with these dollar signs in here? Well, this may be a little bit confusing, especially since we're talking about money, and money is thought of in terms of dollar signs. In this connection in a formula, this has nothing to do with money. The dollar sign in front of either a column letter or a row number means that it shouldn't be changed if I copy this formula from one row to another or from one column to another. This means hold this fixed. And you can see why I need to do that here. These are not moving around the spreadsheet. This value, for example, for code R companies is always found here. Whether that company is here on this line or way at the bottom, its formula better say K5 and not K some other row. Well, this row number would be changed in my copying this formula from here to some other row unless I put that dollar sign in front of the 5. So let's go down here and see all the way down here it still has K5, as it should, but it wouldn't have that unless I had coded this with the dollar sign indicating that I did not want that row number to change when I copied the cell from one row to another. Now let's take a look at something else that's also kind of handy to bring up at this time. What about sorting rows in this spreadsheet? Well, I can certainly do that. I could sort the entire spreadsheet by clicking on this cell and then going to Data and Sort. If I attempt to do that, it wants to know if I have a heading row. If I have a heading row and I click this, it will let me select columns based on the content of the heading row. If I don't have this clicked, then it refers to the columns based on column letters. Now, it might be appealing to attempt to sort this entire spreadsheet using My Data Has Headers. The problem is I have inconsistent kinds of rows here. If I go ahead and do this, these total rows are going to get moved around probably to the bottom, and they're not necessarily going to have values in them as I expect. So it would be inappropriate for me to sort this entire spreadsheet. Let's try this just to see what happens. Suppose I want to put the company names into alphabetical sequence. I've indicated My Data Has Headers. Company name is the field to sort on. And A to Z would mean ascending, alphabetical order. Well, things have changed quite a bit, and not for the better. The totals have gone to the bottom, but the formulas are all mixed up now. They're referring to places that are inappropriate. My little code column has gotten mangled up. It's not a good thing to have sorted this way. I can say that the companies are in the sequence I wanted, but the rest of the sheet is fouled up. Let's back out of that. If I wanted to sort all of these rows and not affect the totals, I could go here, and instead of marking the whole sheet, I would instead mark just the rows that I wanted to sort. And if I do this, when I go to sort, here, I better not have this box checked. If I have it checked, it's going to take one of these rows and it's going to fill that in as if that were the column heading. And that's not the case. This is just a piece of data. I have to uncheck this box. And now it's just simply going to refer to these by column letter. I can do this and it will be much more successful. My totals won't move around. But now I have to specify column B because that's where the company name is located. This sorts the way I wanted things to be done, but notice there's another little problem that came up. Look at how this moved around because it's coded on the same row as one of these companies. Just a little bit of a hint there. If you're going to do this sort of a design where you put some values in that actually become parameters that are not like ordinary rows, you have to space things out in a way that sorting like this wouldn't affect those. This is not exactly the intention that we wanted here. Let's go back and unsort this by doing an undo. We're back to the original sequence now. With these rows still marked, let's do something else that might even be more interesting. Instead of sorting on column B for the company name, let's sort on this code. That would be in column A. Now we see something a little more interesting. The codes line up. We might do this if we actually had to code these things and wanted to make sure that we had gotten the formulas exactly right. And notice here, it just happens that those color bands, in showing us the percentage change, have also made things easy for us to see. And I will return this once again to its original sequence. One pitfall I'd like to point out is this. When you do sorting, you cannot simply sort based on one column. It might seem like that's the way to indicate the column that you want it to act as the sort field, but that's not going to happen. What's going to happen if you do this is just that column is going to get sorted. And here's an easy way to confirm that. Let's take a look. These first few companies, we have different codes for the first four. If I were to mark just this first column by doing this, and I would say sort A to Z, meaning an ascended sequence, watch this. It's going to warn me that I've not selected all this data and it's not going to be sorted. If I continue in this way, all that happens is this column gets sorted and not the stuff next to it. Now this completely mangles the data because I've associated codes with rows that don't even need it, and these codes are not the appropriate codes. If you were to do this by mistake, you could terribly mess up a spreadsheet into which you've put a lot of effort. This is just something to keep in mind. Let's undo that, and thank goodness for an undo function. Remember, you need to mark the entire spreadsheet if you want to sort the entire contents of every row, and then you select with the sort under the data tab the columns that you intend to sort by, and you designate them either by their column letter or by checking that box, the name of the column header. Well, that's as much as I'm going to show you in connection with a little what-if analysis here. I hope this series of videos has been helpful. For people in CSC 200, your work actually consists of following along with what I've done up through video 5. The intention is that you start with the same data I started with and you replicate the same functions, the same operations I've done, and you arrive at the spreadsheet that we created in video 5. It will look like this, and it will have these same values because you will have actually copied the data in the same way. What you need to turn in is this completed spreadsheet with your conditional formatting. I'm not asking you to do anything original. I'm simply asking you to replicate all the operations I've done so you get a little bit of experience here in working with Excel. You don't need to go to the extent of doing the what-if analysis. That is, you don't need to get to the point of this spreadsheet. I only took this a little bit farther to show you the possibilities in doing analysis with this type of a spreadsheet.